Shabbat Shalom. Shalom Aleichem. Assalamu Alaikum. Irini Mazisu. Pax Vobiscum. Peace be unto you. Welcome to 1 Samuel, chapter 30, or First Book of the Kingdoms, chapter 30. In this chapter, there are 31 verses. This is going to be a longer video than usual. Buckle up. Our first difference is an omission in verse 2. Talks about omission of man or woman. As to the women, okay, they slew neither man nor woman. But carried them captives, so they didn't kill any man or woman. So they respected that distinction of the genders. What is the implication here? The significant difference is that they carried them captives versus they took the women captives. As we see in the beginning of the verse in the Masoretic, they took the women captives, but in the Septuagint, they took both. They carried both man or woman, men and women. I should say men. I have to start over again. No, let's not start over again. Men and women were taken captives, as captives in the Septuagint, implying that they left the men in the Masoretic, that is. Verse 6, strengthened versus encouraged. Okay, not a wild difference. Verse 8, you shall surely rescue the captives versus you and without fail recover all. So it's one thing to recover. What is it talking about? Seems to be talking about the captives. Recovering them versus rescuing them. Is that a wild difference? I wouldn't say so either. But there's semantics there. Rescuing the captives, meaning you save their lives. Recovering them means getting them back. Doesn't necessarily mean saving their lives. So I think the implication is, or it's open to the interpretation that you can recover them, but they may not necessarily be alive. Whereas rescuing them means you save their lives. Verse 9, significant difference here. It says bezer in the Septuagint versus superfluous. Bezer and superfluous. One's stopped. Superfluous means unnecessary. So David went, 600 men with him. They came as far as the brook Bezer, and the unnecessary ones stopped. Versus Bezor is the name of the brook, where those that were left behind stayed. Verse 10, tarried, so they waited there on the other side, versus they were so faint, they were weak. So did they wait or were they weak? Now it seems that the Septuagint says that they waited, they were not weak. Verse 12, we have an addition of, 2 clusters of raisins. The footnote says stayed or established in him. Okay, restored in him. So it says in the footnote established or stayed in him. The spirit was restored or established versus the spirit came again to him. Verse 16. Feasting versus dancing, or dancing, as they say in Britain. Feasting, just eating, versus dancing. It's actual, dancing, obviously. You know what that is. I don't have to explain that. Verse 17. Morning versus twilight. Okay, morning, we know what that is. That's when the sun rises. That's early in the morning. This is when daylight begins. But what is twilight? Well, that is the portion of the day, not really technically day, but it is between daylight and darkness. It is the evening. So that's what twilight is. So David killed them from the morning until the evening of the next day. In the Septuagint, or I should say the Masoretic, it says David killed them between the daylight and darkness. So during the evening, even to the evening. So from the evening to the evening. That's essentially what it is. It's saying a 24-hour period. Okay, in the Septuagint, this is not a 24-hour period. Morning until evening is, what is that? That's roughly 12 hours, maybe. If the sun rises at 6 a.m. and sets at 6 p.m., that's 12 hours, not 24 hours. And then it says, and on the next day. So because of this part, this is actually a 24-hour period. So from morning till evening, that's one part of the killing. And then the next day is when they continued the killing. So David did not kill them from morning until evening and then continuing from evening till morning, and then maybe he did, but my understanding is that they resumed on the next day. I could be wrong. Let's see the Masoretic. It says twilight evening into the evening, even until the evening of the next day. So that's a bit of a translation interpretation there. How the translators interpreted the verse. Okay, so it doesn't make as much sense in the Masoretic anyway, in my opinion. Verse 20. It says, led them away, the flocks and the herds, that is, before the spoils. And it was said of these spoils, these are the spoils of David. What does it say in the Masoretic? They drove before those other cattle. So not before the spoils, but before other cattle, and said, this is David's spoil. Okay. So why would you lead flocks and herds before other flocks and herds, essentially? It's a redundancy, in my opinion. Okay, verse 21. There are numerous differences, so let's look at them step by step. So regarding the men, the 200 men who were left behind, versus they were so faint, again, they were just left behind. They weren't weak. However, it says here that he, that is David, caused them to remain. He caused them to remain. Versus David, they made David to wait. So that is a significant difference. David was the one who caused them to remain. It wasn't the men who caused David to wait. There's a difference of a power imbalance, or how power is applied here. David is the one who has power and authority, not the 200 men over David. He's the king. A footnote in Greek says in, not by. Remain in the brook, not by the brook. So they were not near the brook, they were in the brook, or in that area. Maybe not standing in the water, but in that area of Bezer, the brook of Bezer. So the truth comes out in this verse that it was David who asked them to stay, to wait. And then the people asked David how he did. So how are you, King David? Versus David was the one saluting them. No, they were the one asking the king. The king doesn't have to speak to you. You speak to the king. Doesn't have to entertain anyone. Verse 22. Every ill-disposed and bad man of the soldiers. Versus wicked and men of Belial. Verse 23. There is an addition of my brethren. My brethren. Okay, so those added. The Masoretic actually makes more sense, and I don't say this often, but the Masoretic makes more sense regarding delivered the enemy. But this is the translator's wrong interpretation. Okay, so let's read in both. David said, "You shall not do so after Adonai has delivered the enemy to us and guarded us, and Adonai has delivered into our hands the troop that came against us." Okay, that's a typo there. In the internet, anyway. Okay, that makes sense. Masoretic. "You shall not do so, my brethren." So that was added with that which Adonai has given us, who has preserved us, and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. Delivered the company, okay, that came against us. So it's a troop versus company. That came against us, so it seems to be the enemy. In any case, I write here that it makes more sense than the Masoretic in my notes. So, verse 24. There's an omission of, "For they are not inferior to us." That is an important detail because it shows their attitude. They don't think of themselves greater to these other people. Again, it's been a while since I reviewed this, so I apologize. I don't know what I was talking about, but that's the point, is that they are not inferior to us. Verse 29. Okay, let's just review it, just to be sure. Okay, so they're talking about the 200 that waited. So that's who they're referring to. They are not inferior to us. So that's why they are going to share the spoils. So that's their attitude. Verse 29. Carmel and Rachal. So two different places. And the last verse, okay, I guess this video isn't as long as I thought. The last verse is, had passed through. David and his men had passed through these places versus his men, referring to the places, were wont to haunt. So we're not literally haunt like ghosts, but where they would dwell, where they would frequent. Okay, so that's all for this chapter. We're going to be wrapping up this chapter, or this book I should say, in the next video, and then do a summary video. I'm not sure if that will be very soon or at the longest. I'd like to get this video out before the new week starts. Preferably tomorrow. Not really tomorrow. Technically, it's today, but during the day portion of Shabbat, or perhaps even the evening portion of the first day of the week. So that's all for this video in this chapter. Thank you very much for your time. Till next time, I bid you all Shabbat Shalom. Shalom Aleichem. Assalamu Alaikum. Irini Mazisu. Pax Vobiscum. Peace be unto you, and Maranatha.